Welcome to Fintech Engineering. Today we have a really great guest, Adam Bialy, a Chief Product Officer in OpenPayd. And as Adam says, OpenPayd is a Stripe of B2B payments. It's a B2B banking and payment platform with one API integration at a time. And Adam has over 13 years of experience in product management as a technology leader in big financial institutions and as a founder in fintech companies. And he deals mostly with cards and payments value chain and is really great positioned to discuss such topics as core banking, card issuing, merchant acquiring, alternative payment schemes, digital wallets, and gateway processing. So let's go into it. Adam, you have the great experience working in big financial institutions and in fintech companies. So what would you name as the major differences between bigger and smaller financial companies?
In a smaller company, when you're a product person in a smaller company, you're often the jack of all trades. You do everything, right? And it's often just you. Maybe you have, I don't know, a team of 2 or 3, and you're supposed to kind of advance the product, whatever that is, if it's B2B, B2C, on your own, right? You're supposed to come up with the roadmap, come up with the strategy. Typically, you're empowered directly by the CEO to take matters into your own hands. Whereas, and then maybe also the other point worth noting is it's not as structured as the other scenario, which is where you're in an enterprise organization. Where there's a lot of structure, there's a lot of bureaucracy. I'll probably say. I guess in my experience, I moved from small company or smallish company to a massive kind of organization like which is Sainsbury's, second biggest retailer in the UK, 200,000 employees. It doesn't get bigger than that in the country. I guess maybe Tesco is bigger. So to enact change, which is essentially one of the key roles of any product leader, yes, you can still do it in the enterprise environment, but it's harder, and you need to navigate the different stakeholders. You need to build alliances. You need to establish yourself first, so that you have actual influence and a mandate to get things done. Whereas in a smaller company, you tend to be, if the senior management or executive team trusts you, you tend to be empowered to sort of drive the product in the direction that you feel is appropriate. So that is the kind of the difference at a high level, I think.
So in a bigger financial company, working as a technology leader, you have more resources to implement your product backlog and probably scale faster. But in a smaller company, you're more constrained and you need to spend your resources more cautiously. So the question is, isn't it more interesting to work in bigger company versus smaller company and be able to implement all your ideas faster?
Yes, I would agree that you have more resources, and but you tend to have tunnel, or you tend to be forced into the situation where you have tunnel vision of your respective area, like your specific area that you're being put in charge of, right? In my case, in Sainsbury's, that was payments, right? So I was essentially owning this area end to end, and it was a journey. It started with trying to have the massive organization or massive retailer like Sainsbury's understand the value of payments, right? That was the main the main challenge throughout my time there. But you sort of have this responsibility, and it's quite narrow. And yes, you have a lot of resources. You can go faster, but your impact is smaller, right?
Okay.
Or your impact is limited only to the area that you're in, unless you're at the very top of the organization or the hierarchy where you have multiple teams working for you, and you but then your ability to enact change is dependent on the people that you hire, and the people that you put in place, and the structures, the culture that you establish. So that's one. On the smaller company side, it is, again, you can take matters into your own hands. And I tend to find myself wearing really many hats. Just to give you an example here at OpenPayd, it's not a small company, it's a medium company. But I had essentially, for a time, I had to take this hat of essentially an interim CTO for a moment, right, until the acting or the proper CTO was established, and then actually take care of the development team in one of our locations. So whereas in a larger organization or an enterprise setting, you would essentially have your mandate given to you like from the start, and not much deviations from that mandate, right? So, and then also in a small organization, you're more commercially focused, right? Because the resources are scarcer, and therefore you need to take more responsibility for them and for the return on investment, which is someone giving you those resources. So that forces you to really think and really be lean in your kind of development approach, and eliminate waste wherever possible, and also adopt this MVP approach, where you define something, you define what is the kind of chunk of work or chunk of the product that you want to ship first, validate, learn from it, and move on. Whereas in an enterprise setting, that life cycle is expanded, it's longer.
There are different approaches how to evaluate the return on investment for feature development. It could be based on customer requests or product manager analysis, or maybe mixed approach. So the question is, how do you evaluate the return on investment for feature development, and what are the metrics for that?
I have a slightly extreme approach, and a lot of that was learned over at Y Combinator at the startup school that I was part of. I have this approach that essentially you start measuring the value of a feature or a product starting from the problem, right? So what is the problem that it solves? And it's not asking the question, what is the problem, like, and trying to the bottom of what is the problem. Is validating that it's actually a problem. And then when you go into that level of question, how do you know it's a problem? Have you seen it elsewhere? Who may, apart from you, dear stakeholder, dear customer, may have that problem? You start getting metrics back. Essentially validate the problem even before the solution is devised for it. So I tend to derive measurements of return on investment of a feature or a solution based on how much of the problem does that solution solve, right? How much of the problem does it address, and what is the scale of the problem first and foremost? So and also in terms of so first metric is essentially how well it solves the problem. You can measure that, like, this is a qualitative metric, and you can definitely source different pieces of data to validate your problem, and then make sure that the solution is actually adequate to the problem that you're trying to solve. The worst case scenario is when you have a solution ready to go, you build it based on a hypothesis or an assumption that you haven't validated, and it's this classic scenario of a solution looking for a problem, right? And then you're trying to ship the solution to people that you think have a problem, but more often than not, it results in failure, and inadequate solutions being shipped. So and also in terms of ROI, like crudely, just the ROI calculation, you kind of need to factor in the effort that you spend analyzing the problem and then devising the solution. And then if there's a direct benefit to the customer, and that tends to change depending on how well the problem is solved, right? So I always come back to this problem. It can be a soft benefit, or it can be a hard benefit. Hard benefit is revenue, and monetizing a specific feature, or productizing and then monetizing a specific feature. A soft benefit is change of quality of user experience somewhere in the value chain, right? So increase in quality of user experience. So let's say your internal stakeholder, if it's an internal facing feature, or your customer basically giving you a thumbs up, yeah, this is what I wanted, and that's great. And to your point that you said, sometimes a customer asks for something, I tend to steer away from that scenario. I have this approach that the customer, like more often than not, doesn't know what they want.
Okay.
They tend to know the problem that they have, right? And it's really important to get to that problem and then help them solve it. But more often than not, I find, at least in my experience, B2B, B2C customers don't know that they have, the problem until you ask them about it. So you need to question the problem first, and then devise the solution to it yourself based on the information that you've gathered.
Adam, how will you identify the list of questions that can be used during the product workshops?
So that's also something that came, from the Y Combinator brainwash. It's like it's always having you. They teach you there to kind of always be close to your customers, no matter at what point in the development of your company you are. Always talk to your customers, no matter how big, how small that undertaking is. Just talk to them. Have several metrics that you always measure, and just talk to them. If it's a direct phone call to an owner of a business, if it's a B2B, if it's sampling a group of consumers and trying to validate a specific hypothesis for a feature. Different ways. I don't tend to do like very structured customer research, or whatever you call it, talking to your users. I tend to try and apply quantitative method, like research methods, only where it's appropriate, where the phenomenon is large enough in scale that I kind of need to gather a broader data set, right, to prove something. But more often than not, I just pick up the phone, call a customer, or spend an hour with a customer trying to question them on the problem. And then I always find myself going into this rabbit hole with customers, well, not always, sometimes, where they say, oh, I need this. This is your opportunity as a product leader to unpack it. It's like, why do you think you need this? But what is the problem that this solves for you? Like, where do you think you have the problem? Tell me a bit more about it, right? Can we spend some time validating that you actually have a problem? And then when you start, it's just basic psychology. When you start questioning along those lines, you often find that the customer or the user will reveal things to you that they thought, they opened their mind a little bit, and they thought that those things were not relevant, or that they already had the answer, and they just wanted to convince you that you should deliver the answer to their problems, right? So it's a questioning technique that is always try to go back to the first principle, and in that case, it's the problem, right? It's how you identify the problem, then how you validate that actually is a problem.
Adam, we all know that product backlogs tend to grow enormously. And sometimes it's really hard to identify what should be developed next. So how do you prioritize your product backlog to deliver the maximum value for your clients?
It depends on the scenario, because sometimes it might be that a problem is so obvious that it needs to be solved right now, right? And it has immediate benefits. There's no other company or maybe a solution provider that can solve the problem. I'm now in B2B, so I'm kind of thinking along the lines of how to satisfy the needs of a B2B customer more than a B2C customer, right? So that tends to be a conversation. Can we monetize this, right? Is that like, so can we monetize this internally? Can the customer pay for it? If not, is this an obvious problem that the customer has, and does that threaten the relationship, for example, or does that threaten one of their capabilities that they are enabling for their customers, or they're shipping to their users? And then kind of asking questions as you go, one level below each of those questions. You sort of ask different kind of questions, but it's trying to focus. Long story short, it's trying to focus on ruthlessly prioritizing stuff that is actually needed right now. And stuff that has immediate benefit, be it qualitative or quantitative.
Adam, fintech is pretty fragmented space, and each fintech is trying to fill some gap on the market. So for that, they need to develop their own APIs or consume third-party APIs to be able to integrate into the fintech ecosystem. So integrations is actually the big chunk of work for software development teams. And my question is, what kind of API strategies have you seen and what kind of integrations have you done in OpenPayd?
It's a good question. I think integrations are, and we often talk about this in terms of API economy, right? The economy in tech has changed to be more like API driven, where there's different network. It's almost like a network theory in practice, where you have different players complementing their capabilities and building this network of services. I think in banking, which is essentially the industry that OpenPayd is trying to disrupt, or maybe augment is the better word, tweak, put a layer on top. If you think of, let's say, what Stripe did, okay, with the card payments industry, and I just want to be very clear, this is a very different industry, and it has parallels, but card payments and like banking or core banking, two very different things. Yeah, well, you talk about an established value chain with Visa, MasterCard as the overlords or the overseers, whereas on the banking side, you talk about more decentralized model where each bank, has its own agenda. So with that in mind, if you look at what Stripe did when they started, they set on the mission to essentially make card payments accessible to developers through this new movement that was the API economy, to make it as easy as possible to kick off your proposition, get it up and running, and have card payments, and have you for you to have a method to collect money from your customers like straight away, like in days, right? And therefore they focused on making it super easy for developers to take their product, take their APIs, take their endpoints, package them together, build workflows, and just start making money, right? On the banking side of things, so that was card payments. On the banking side of things, we feel at OpenPayd that a similar kind of activity is needed, a similar activity. And what I mean by that is the APIs or banks need to be accessible using APIs more so than they are currently, or than they are right now. So there needs to be more focus. And why do we say that? Because when you have APIs, you can automate things, right, that typically sit in the very bottom of the value chains, and you typically talk about finance people or treasury people reconciling payments or sending payments from one place to another, everything done manually, Excel, spreadsheets, Nirvana kind of thing, no automation whatsoever, and this human being pushing that button somewhere in the workflow, right? A lot of that can be automated, but to do that, you need this layer of aggregation or integration of different bank providers, and this common denominator, like a Stripe API, that is a thing, right? As a developer, you just pick it up and it's like, oh, it's easy. There's a sandbox, I can integrate to it in an hour, right? There's a couple of test endpoints, there are guides, there's webhooks for notifications. Everything is there. Everything is beautifully described. Documentation is there, and it gives me a gateway to many different places, right? And this is where it comes back to your question. Integrations are what sits underneath the, let's say, the aggregator's API, right? So as OpenPayd, we have integrations to many different bank providers, and we abstract this complexity of having to integrate to each one of them. And this is that level of integration is slightly more intimate, okay, compared to, say, an open banking integration or the open standard of using open banking APIs. It's more of a, I'm posting a transaction to your core banking system. And I'm getting I'm getting funds moved between the different bank providers or banks. So actual money is moving. It's not just triggering the transaction. It's the settlement, the reconciliation flows. It is all the different bank payment schemes, SEPA, SWIFT, ACH. That's what we try and abstract to a level of a single API that a developer can just pick up and say, okay, I understand this. The complexity is now condensed or compressed for me to a bunch of endpoints that are quite self-explanatory, so I can start playing around with it.
Adam, very straightforward question. What gap are you trying to fill in payment ecosystem with OpenPayd solution?
It's becoming the Stripe of B2B bank payments. So giving people access quickly to bank payments infrastructure, getting their propositions up and running. So we're talking B2B. So our customers tend to have their own either consumer propositions or other B2B propositions. So spinning up new businesses or new products quickly and having this bank payments, bank rails playground that they can just pick up and run with really, really quickly. That's topped off with our global reach of regulatory licenses, right? So we're a regulated e-money institution in a bunch of countries, in the UK, in Europe, in US, in Canada, in Turkey. We're working in Singapore. So we're going wide, essentially. So you only need to enter once and you get access to a bunch of licenses or bunch of regulatory coverage that potentially some of our competitors lack, right? They might be focusing on one geography. So we try to go wide in terms of geographical reach, but still make it really, really simple to access banking, payments, banking and payments products using one single integration.
Adam, what major challenges software developers need to overcome while doing integrations?
The number one challenge would be the common denominator in the different bank payment schemes. So you have different bank payment schemes that require different fields to be inputted just to submit a payment, and they tend to vary depending on like local and also international payment schemes. So international payment schemes are like SEPA, SWIFT, whereas local are faster payments, ACH in the US, or Fedwire in the US, and then different local clearinghouses in different countries have their own sort of payment schemes, right? For local money movements between banks within the same geography. So that level of complexity, we try and make it easier because we arrived at a common denominator of a set of fields that this is just the thing that you need to submit a payment, right? No matter the payment scheme. But developers should always be aware of the differences between those schemes and what that means in the workflow, right? How does that manifest itself? Like, does that mean that the payment comes first and then the notification always follows, or maybe the notification comes first because it's an online payment method that is supposed to satisfy this need to get paid instantly, right? And then the payment, the actual money follows, right? So understanding of workflows depending on the payment scheme is one challenge. Second challenge, I would say, is testing environments. It's almost like an accepted truth right now that for you to actually test something in the bank payments or bank transfer space, you actually need to be live, right? Because the different sandboxes that the banks offer don't give you that level of fidelity to really test your money movement scenarios, right? And it's typically only when money actually moves then you start spotting the different bugs or the different snags of how you may have built workflows and maybe missed something, right? So it's this pressure to go live as soon as possible just to see money moving. That developers need to be aware of when integrating to us or to different banks as well. And then the third thing is the level of automation and sometimes missed opportunities when developers pick up an API of a bank or an aggregator like OpenPayd. They only tend to, like, at least in my experience, they only tend to look at the immediate, like, let's say, base system jobs that they want to satisfy. It's like, how do I trigger a payment? How do I trigger a beneficiary creation? How do I trigger balance query, right? And then how does that fit with my existing workflow? I feel like, and we've tried to steer our clients towards a more elaborate discovery process where they would examine their existing workflows, like wherever that, our integration goes into. Let's say it's an accounting system or a treasury management system. They examine their existing workflows and they look for opportunities to automate to exactly, at the same time a payment is triggered on the OpenPayd platform or with one of our banks. It comes directly from the source of information of who needs to be paid at any given moment, right? Which tends to be treasury systems or accounting systems, and that sort of big picture thinking, or that holistic approach to building API workflows or integration workflows, is what we encourage our customers to do. And some of them struggle with that because there's an existing habit where their finance teams or treasury teams, everything is done manually. But we try and encourage as much as possible. You have an opportunity when you're picking up my API, you have an opportunity to automate this process completely or that process completely. Have a look at your workflows, have a look at your internal integrations, have a look at your architecture, and see if there's opportunities to improve things over there. So yeah, that's also I would guess best practice for dealing with bank providers or bank rails providers such as us.
Adam, I have read your article regarding open banking a while ago. So what do you think? Is there a competition between fintechs and big banks, or they are in cooperative mode?
I think it's a tricky one because the fintechs are almost this new kid on the block, right? With new value-adding propositions, and they tend to want to get access to the customers of the banks, right? Of the established banks. So there's always going to be tension. There's always going to be friction. There's always going to be, oh, you're trying to steal my customer, or you're trying to make money on my customer, and I have not done a good job, right? But open banking, as a movement, as an initiative, was supposed to open this space up to make it more competitive, because ultimately the consumer stands to gain from increasing competitiveness of in that space, right? So, and that is commendable. That is what the regulators in Europe have done. That is absolutely spot on. That unlocked this sentiment of I have a better idea, right? And it all of a sudden became a meritocracy of sorts, right? I have a better idea on how to serve your customer, and now you essentially are forced to give me access to this through open banking. Although you're throwing hurdles at me because you don't maintain those APIs, you just release them just to tick a box, or you don't really want to help me when I'm building my workflows, right? But you kind of have to, like, there's an open standard now where you have to give me access to those customers. And yes, the banks will feel threatened naturally, because that's something that is beyond their control. They may feel that they're losing control of the transactional side of banking, right? Because of the fintechs, because of open banking, and because of someone else trying to solve the problem of my customer, right? But the bank should my feel is, or my opinion is, the bank should treat this more as an opportunity to really go back to what they're good at, right? Because no one has come up with a better thing than deposit taking, lending, right? A bank being there when you need them, right? And evaluating you or getting to know you as a customer worthy of credit, right? That is the core function of banks. The transactional side of things is just an add-on in terms of how money moves. And if you look at that space, actually, if you zoom in on the way money moves around the world, it's all based off of 50-year-old or 60-year-old rails and infrastructures that have not changed, have not moved, and it's still the same. Even Visa and MasterCard, as much as Stripe abstracted the complexity of that, it's still the same let's say, base jobs that have been or the same workflows that have been in existence for 50 years. They were invented in 1970s, right? And it's still the same. It's the same authorization process, the same clearing process, the same settlement. Hasn't moved. Yes, you can tweak it, you can expose different fields and add stuff to it, add some metadata to those workflows, but they're still the same. They're still the same value chains. And it's the same with banking, Swift, and all those ecosystems. I think an infrastructure upgrade is what's needed on the, let's say, transactional banking side of things, or payments, and it's well overdue, and that will that will potentially even further upset the balance that we currently have, or let's say the advantage that the current banks hold on transaction banking side of things, in favor of fintechs or people who actually want to solve a problem in the marketplace for the customer. Want to transfer money faster, want to do it cheaper, want to innovate.
Adam, as we know, product managers, they need to have product domain knowledge, but software developers, they don't necessarily need domain knowledge. But what do you think? Should software developers have knowledge and experience in fintech, in finance, payments to perform well? And do you think it's really an interesting time to work in fintech for software developers?
Yeah, of course. I always look at it. So the dynamic between product and tech is it's the same community. It's the same. Let's say, I don't know. It's the same country in a confederation model or a confederacy model. Let's say we're talking about Switzerland, right? So Switzerland is the community, but the different cantons or the regions within Switzerland that have autonomy are tech, product, and maybe the business, right? That's the comparison that I use. So you're still part of the same, because your goal is still the same. You want to serve your customers. You want to build the best possible solution to their problems, right? But you're approaching the problem from different things or different questions, right? There's always this coined expression that the product function is responsible for the why and what, whereas the tech function is responsible for the how. What that tends to your question, what that tends to mean is that the how side of things doesn't get engaged with why are we doing this, right?
Okay.
Or sometimes it works out that way, or sometimes when there's not necessarily a good dynamic between the two functions. When you wake up a developer in the middle of the night and you ask them why are you there? Why are you in this company? What are you doing? Do you know your backlog, by the way? And do you like the product manager that is managing it? They would probably blank at you, and it's like, I'm just doing code, or I'm building this microservice that is, So the trick in being a good product leader and also a good CTO is to make the people that are doing the heavy lifting, which is software developers, understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and at any given point be able to almost give you an elevator pitch of why they think it's exciting, right? So I think with fintech in particular, you have all sorts of technical challenges that need to be solved. You have the legacy platforms or the legacy infrastructure that people are kind of building on top of and trying to tweak it or outright change it, although that would need immense amount of resources to actually change it, but definitely tweak it and absorb the, let's say, the knowledge that and the experience that people have accumulated over 50 or 60 years, and just unpack it and build something new on top of it, right? That's exciting. That's really exciting for a software developer to pick up, let's say a banking API, look at, oh, actually, there seems to be this recurring pattern that there's like 4 endpoints or 4 base jobs that just seem to be recurring. Initiate a payment, get a notification that the payment has been received, get some balance, and view a list of transactions, right? it's all the same thing, but it's done in with each bank. It's done slightly differently, or there's a different format in which those messages are being expressed, or some of it is RESTful API, some of it is still SOAP, some of it is good old JSON, XML, excuse me, and it's just fun to look at those challenges as technical advancement opportunities for the individuals. And it's like, if I hack this, I will then have proven for this particular part of the product or part of the value chain that I understand it, and I can rebuild, test, rebuild, and help companies like that. So I think it's challenging enough on a technical level for people to be excited about it, about this space. And then going back to the dynamic between product and tech, the best scenario that you can have is when CTO and CPO or head of product are best buddies, right? And I also tend to see that shift towards empowered product teams, where product teams are essentially taking the lead in terms of making sure that the rest of the tech community understands what needs to be built, why it's being built, through developing those cross-functional teams, feature teams, whatever you call them. But essentially, the product person in that team is the leader, is almost like a tech lead. And I've seen this model being applied very successfully in a bunch of organizations. It doesn't always work. It needs really switched on developers that are willing to contribute, to build the architecture as they go, to brainstorm with the business, be a bit more open. But it works, and it allows you to go faster, right? So this I always like to think that what is amazing from extreme programming is this empowerment of a team, right? Or whatever that is. It's a squad or a tribe, feature team or product team, whatever you call it. The empowerment to kind of drive the agenda, have the roadmap of their own, and have input from everyone, and be really collaborative, kind of working together. Devs or software engineers pair programming. TDD tends to be utilized a lot as well. So test and then code, and that, in my experience, if you have the right team, you have a bunch of A players that are driving the agenda on the software development side, it works. And it allows you to really pivot quickly if you've done something wrong, or you may have not understood the problem. Change things around, shift your focus, and really develop stuff that adds value. So from let's say a ways of working methodology, I always find this, as soon as you can drive that dynamic where product and tech are essentially seen as complementary functions of the same team, right? And there's this almost intimate understanding. Is like, this is why I'm in this team. This is what I'm building. I'm a software engineer, and this guy knows what he's doing, right? And he understands the customer problem, and he's sharing a lot of that with me, right? Then you're gonna have successful scenarios where stuff is getting delivered really fast, velocity improves, understanding of developers of what they're doing also is quite high, and everyone is excited, everyone is passionate about what they're building.
Adam, what's your approach regarding structuring product and engineering teams? Is it by project, by product area, or by technology or layer of architecture?
In OpenPayd, we have initially started with one single team, and it was very challenging because that team was growing and bigger and bigger with every week, and it was increasingly difficult to maintain, and even the most rudimentary ceremonies, right? Just give me your update, what you've been up to, with 30 people on the call. That's just chaos. So I started divvying up according to a problem, and as if you can actually. So the problem is a combination of features typically, or a combination of products even sometimes. It is product area. It's like if you look at it on the surface, it looks like, oh, you're dividing teams by product area. So you have one for compliance, one for core, one for external banking integrations, one for data, right? That's essentially the divide right now.
Okay.
But it's also, it needs to be also compatible with this, like what is the problem that each one of those teams is solving, right? They need to be able to tell you, they need to be able to embrace it and relate to it. It's like, oh, I want to get this organization more data savvy. I want to enable my business functions to not run around blind, not knowing what's happening within the business, right? And actually derive meaningful analytics or insights. That's the data team that I just told you about, right? And that data team has a product owner who's, let's say, driving the agenda from a why and what, and then it has software engineers and testers within that team. It's a team of 7, right? Then you have, I don't know, the compliance team. Okay, what is the problem that we're solving there? We're trying to protect the business from device solutions to problems like transaction monitoring, KYC, onboarding of clients, which is incredibly important, right? So if you manage, if you like, there is a way. Typically, there is a way to arrange those teams around the problem that is being solved, right? And if it's very clear that this team has, let's say, 1 or 2 main problems that they're solving, and they're constantly tracking against the delivery is being tracked against those problems, then you can assume that you're on the right track. That means performance. That means that they know what they're doing, and therefore they're going to collaborate. They're going to talk to each other. Engineers are going to brainstorm solutions on the fly. They're going to be engaged. They're not going to just be sitting there and just locking themselves up and producing something. You need to create that environment where people understand what they're doing, why it's important, and what difference it makes to the wider kind of product. And that's why I tend to organize teams around problems.
Oh, Adam, so thank you. That's really cool. And another question is related to CI/CD process. So what about release management? So how it is done in your team?
We have started with quite a chaotic way to organize releases, and we weren't really structuring it a lot. But then we introduced this. It just naturally started falling into place, and it's aligning against sprints. So we do two-week sprints, and every 2 weeks there's a release, and we just penned it and said, okay, there's a release to live every 2 weeks. And if you miss it, it's almost like this idea of agile release train, right? If you miss it, then there's always the next one, 2 weeks later, right? But we are trying to keep ourselves disciplined, and 2 weeks is a sweet spot of, it's often enough, but it's also not too often, or it's not too distant, right? And there's always a next release coming up, and off the back of it, we had to develop this development lifecycle, which is from dev environment, code moving to maybe feature branches, then merged into the QA environment, then it goes to sandbox, which is where product team and stakeholders test, potentially some customers as well. And then it goes to production on the dot, like at the date that we sort of we set for ourselves every 2 weeks. So that's how we're managing development of the new platform. The old platform, we're sort of slowing down the development, so the releases are scarcer, and we're just doing critical bug fixes and kind of performance improvements as and when needed on an ad hoc basis. So yeah, we're already at that point where we're sort of switching focus to the new platform.
Oh, release trains, they are really great for larger organizations to synchronize all the engineering teams together. So mostly we all work from home right now, but some companies, they were more prepared, some companies less prepared. So definitely for software development companies and tech companies, it's easier to work remotely. But what about your team? Have you identified some unique best practices to work remotely as a distributed team?
We're quite well established, actually. So we had developers all around the globe. We have developers in Turkey, Bulgaria, London, Malta. So we kind of had to, had to learn how to work together,
Mm-hmm.
distributed agile, whatever you call it, right? It's
Okay.
to align kind of different time zones, right? But yeah, most people were working remotely already, so it wasn't much of a change when COVID hit. That being said, obviously, what we're missing is this immersion, physical interaction. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Typically with product people, because product people are the ones that tend to grab a pen and just start writing on the whiteboard, right? When they're
Mm-hmm.
trying to
Okay.
explain something,
Okay.
and senior engineers, when they talk about architecture, they also tend to sort of draw a diagram and only then talk about it. So
Mm-hmm.
that has been a challenge, but there's not like there's even a solution to that. There's virtual whiteboards that you
That's
can
it.
just
That's it.
you can just pull up and like plug in the middle of a meeting, share your screen, and it's like, okay, I'm drawing, and then people are just highlighting stuff as you do it. So there's collaboration tools, and I think we adjusted pretty well to the world, to the COVID um, world after COVID, I guess.
We all know that team culture is really very important to have great results. But right now it's a little bit tricky because we can't meet offline every day. And when you work from office, it's more organic to have human interaction. But working online, you tend to focus more on work questions. But my question is, how do you preserve and develop your team culture working remotely as a distributed team?
The way we've addressed it is through being really disciplined with our ceremonies. So we
Mm-hmm.
have obviously we have different feature teams or product teams. So they have their own ceremonies, right? They have their own stand-ups. They have their own sprint planning. They have their own backlog refinement. They have their own retros, right? But the demo we kept like all together. It's
Mm-hmm.
the entire tech and product community that is, and we
Mm-hmm.
made it into an event. It's like, we call it the demo day, right?
Okay.
So we made it into an event where everyone, like, and everyone has a spot, like everyone has a talking spot on every representative of the respective feature team has a talking spot. There's stakeholders invited into it, and that they can show the work, right? And on the screen, they tend to present the working software or a bunch, an interface or a workflow from an API. An API workflow just working, right? Or doing a transaction, and you can always, like, you almost can grasp it, right? And that's a good opportunity for people to share, this is what we've been up to, this is the result of our work, this is how it works, and this is why I'm excited about it. And it just invites that helpful or useful, healthy interaction within the team. And I made it longer, so it's not like we're in a rush. We're supposed to now just take stock of what we've built in the last 2 weeks and enjoy it, right? And just give feedback to each other. So we made the demo into this kind of corral everyone back together and make sure we're sort of pulling in the same direction. And it works. It's like it's by far the most engaging ceremony that is at least the most popular within the company, because everyone is dropping in just because they're curious of what the tech team and the product teams have been up to over the last 2 weeks. So yeah, so we've used the ceremonies for that, and also obviously regular catch-ups on more tactical topics or on an ad hoc basis on Zoom. Um, Given that people are in different geographies anyway, we're kind of used to calling each other, and we don't miss that element. Obviously, physical interaction would have been ideal, but we don't really miss it that much. I find it's we navigate around it. with what we have at our disposal, be it tools or just have a longer meeting and just flesh things out and then close it off, send a note after a meeting. So we just keep those little rules of engagement consistent, and it just works. Like, it's best way to show what you've been up to is by just showing the work, the result, right? And
That's
then
it.
having people see it on the screen and react to it. Like, obviously a lot of people are visual, they like to see stuff, and yeah, that just gives an opportunity to present it, talk about it, give feedback, exchange ideas as well if we have time, and it just gives that forum where where people feel safe to contribute, right? And that's really important, I think.
Okay, so in tech and fintech, it's really very important to stay updated. And my question is, how do you learn? Any recommendations regarding courses, conferences, books, any other techniques that you have for learning as a technology leader?
I will say that I learned the most from just talking to customers.
Okay.
Especially when you're B2B, you kind of need to talk to customers because that's your lifeline. That's your lifeline to feedback. That's your lifeline to trends. That's your lifeline to, and then off the back of customer conversations, you then research a bit more. Maybe you do some desk research of, oh, they just told me about this. I'm just gonna check what the what a competition is doing. Oh, someone has done a conference about it. Okay, maybe I'll sign up to it. So typically, in my case, it starts with customers. And yeah, and also going back to the very first point that I made, when you're talking to customers, talk about their problems. You're going to learn so much. Like, don't try and steer the conversation and towards a solution too soon, right? Because when you stop yourself and you talk about problems, you glean all sorts of things. It's like, okay, so this is my current reconciliation process in the company, or that's how the other competitor of yours was suggesting that they solve this particular problem, but I don't think that they're actually solving the problem. From those conversations you get so much that then it just sends you on a quest to naturally sends you on a quest to pursue more information elsewhere, right? And you just do your digging in your own time or spare time. I do read books. I tend to focus on leadership books nowadays. So I really like Simon Sinek, and his 3 books. So Start with Why, Leaders Eat Last, and then Infinite and Finite Games. Really love it. It's just gives you this really practical advice on how to lead your teams and inspire them and motivate them, and how to focus on what's important, which is the why, right? Then I read a few UX books. I'm a fan of Lean UX, which is almost like a derivative of Lean Startup, but it's more focused on user experience. I feel like any product leader should have a natural sense of UX. And if you don't, if you might be less experienced in UX, or you might have not worked with designers or UX people, or not have designed experiences yourself, then reading up on it and filling that gap is absolutely crucial for any product person, not even leaders. Because the UX is again, when you go back to the customer, you talk about their problems, you essentially talk about their user experience, right? Even before the user experience is actually established, you're essentially unpacking what they're currently doing, and when you have tools to ask the right questions, to question them on certain things, and trying to get to the bottom of their problem, you're going to get that information that will then inspire you to get somewhere else and research it further. That's, at least that's my approach, and it's worked quite well for me. Yeah, and conferences as well, talking with your peers and exchanging approaches, opinions, I always find it useful. That's how I learned about extreme programming. I was actually working initially with Pivotal Labs in London, and I got exposed to that firsthand when I was at Sainsbury's, and I really liked it. And then exchanging ideas throughout my career of how did you manage to sort of coin this way of working that is almost like a trademark of yours, Pivotal Way. I think there's a book about it. And it's fascinating how, when you have the right players or really smart people in your team, how you can accelerate, like drastically you can accelerate your performance by just sticking to a few simple rules and implementing a methodology, right? So yeah, talking to industry full level industry professionals. I get approached on LinkedIn from time to time for advice, career advice. And the things that I tend to say is, try and hone your kind of core product owner skill set. And by that I mean, being able to connect the dots, being able to focus on a customer problem, talking to your customers, and also your sense of UX. If you have those three things, you're going to be a tremendous product leader. And every single techie is going to like you as well, because you're essentially talking in their language, right? Or you're bringing into the conversation something that they might not be focusing on. So that's what I do.
Adam, thank you very much for this great conversation and for contributing in our fintech engineering community. And I wish all the best to you and to OpenPayd team. And I hope to see you soon. And please, the very last message.
Yeah, no, thanks. It was a great conversation. I think it's exciting time as well right now, that we're from it's one perspective it's sad, but on the other hand it's actually also exciting. As I said, every crisis is an opportunity, and it's down to the people how and organizations how they position their resources in response to the crisis. So just be smart, be nimble, and don't be afraid to change your mind every now and then. But at the same time, and that might sound counterintuitive, try and stick to your guns once you've made up your mind, because changing minds too often is also going to hinder progress.
So thank you for watching this interview, and it was Adam Bialy, Chief Product Officer at OpenPayd, and me, Vasil Soloshchuk from Insert. And like this video, share this video with your friends, and also please write down in comments below what do you think about open banking, about software development in fintech companies. So everything that you have heard, so let's discuss, let's get in touch through the comments, and like this video, subscribe to our channel to get more video like this. And thank you for watching this video, and see you in the next episode of Fintech Engineering.